Welcome. I'm Eric Fleming, host of A Moment with Eric Fleming, the podcast of our time. I want to personally thank you for listening to the podcast. If you like what you're hearing, then I need you to do a few things. First, I need subscribers. I'm on Patreon at patreon.com/A Moment with Eric Fleming. Your subscription allows an independent podcaster like me the freedom to speak truth to power and to expand and improve the show. Second, leave a 5-star review for the podcast on the streaming service you listen to it. That will help the podcast tremendously. Third, go to the website, momenteric.com. There you can subscribe to the podcast, leave reviews and comments, listen to past episodes, and even learn a little bit about your host. Lastly, don't keep this a secret like it's your own personal guilty pleasure. Tell someone else about the podcast. Encourage others to listen to the podcast and share the podcast on your social media platforms because it is time to make this moment a movement. Thanks in advance for supporting the podcast of our time. I hope you enjoy this episode as well. Hello, and welcome to another Moment with Eric Fleming. I am your host, Eric Fleming. And today we have two guests coming on. One's going to talk about history and one's going to give us a little inspiration. And I think that you all will really enjoy these gentlemen's presentations. I was really honored that they accepted the invitation to come on the podcast, and I think you will enjoy these interviews and how these gentlemen present themselves to you. We're getting close to the convention. I am excited to be heading to Chicago. I want to thank those people who did donate and the GoFundMe. We didn't reach the exact goal that we had set forward to, but, we did raise some money, and, at least I'll be attending, and, whatever other arrangements have to be made, we'll make those. But I do appreciate everybody who did contribute. The GoFundMe site is still up. So if you still want to do that, I still have the link active on the website, www.momenteric.com. If, you want to give something to kind of reimburse or whatever, that's fine. There's no pressure on that at this point. But, just to get some awareness. And again, I appreciate those people who gave freely to help me cover this convention. All right, now that I got that housekeeping out of the way, now it's time to get the show started. And as always, we started with a moment of news with Grace G.
Thanks, Eric. Vice President Kamala Harris selected Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her running mate for the upcoming presidential campaign. The U.S. Supreme Court refused Missouri's bid to stop Donald Trump's sentencing in New York. U.S. Representative Cori Bush of Missouri lost her Democratic primary to St. Louis County Prosecutor Wesley Bell, marking a second victory for pro-Israel groups. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin revoked plea deals with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and two accomplices accused of masterminding the September 11th attacks. U.S. District Judge Tanya Chutkan scheduled a pretrial meeting in Donald Trump's insurrection case for August 16th. Several U.S. personnel were injured in a suspected rocket attack on Al-Assad Air Base in Iraq. Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina resigned and fled after a deadly crackdown on protests. Tropical Storm Debbie caused heavy rainfall and at least 6 deaths in Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas. FBI agents seized the cell phone of U.S. Representative Andy Ogles as part of an investigation into his campaign fund disclosures. A Virginia man was charged with making violent online threats against Vice President Harris shortly after she began her presidential campaign. A Pakistani man has been charged for attempting to recruit individuals to assassinate U.S. officials in retaliation for the 2020 killing of Iranian commander Qasem Soleimani. A federal judge ruled that a lawsuit from Jewish students alleging Harvard University allowed anti-Semitism to thrive on campus may proceed. An Ohio judge upheld a state law banning gender-affirming care for transgender minors. And a former Kansas police chief will be charged with interfering in the judicial process after leading a widely condemned raid on a local newspaper. I am Grace G., and this has been A Moment of News.
All right. Thank you, Grace, for that moment of news, as always. And now it's time for my guest, Tim Wendel. Tim Wendel lives in Charlottesville, Virginia, and is a writer in residence at Johns Hopkins University. He is the author of Summer of '68, Cancer Crossings, High Heat, and the historical novels Castro's Curveball and its sequel, Escape from Castro's Cuba. His new book, which we will be discussing today on the podcast, is also a historical novel, and it is entitled Rebel Falls. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and privilege to have as a guest on this podcast, Tim Wendel. All right, Tim Wendel, how you doing, sir? You doing good?
Great, Eric. Great to be with you.
Well, I'm honored to have you because you've written this book. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, Tim. I'm not a big fiction person. I mean, I'm not a big fiction person. But historical fiction is cooler than regular fiction to me because I love history. And so you've written this book called Rebel Falls that we'll get to, that falls under that historical fiction category. And you did it from a very interesting perspective. Now, how many books have you written?
Oh, Lord, Eric. This is my 16th book. It keeps me off the streets.
Again, one of the things I admire about people, because people used to come to me about politics and say, how can you give all these speeches and how do you do all that stuff? and but I'm more fascinated with writers, people that can come up with all these different concepts for shows or write all these different books. Especially with a particular character, and they can go on and on, or if they go from different characters in different periods. It's just always been fascinating to me. So I appreciate somebody that's talented as you and also smarter than me because, I think the world's a much better place because I'm not the smartest person in the room. So, Tim, what I normally do is to kind of do an icebreaker. I throw a quote at the guest. So your quote is this. Here was the last point on which North and South agreed. Anyone who still believed in compromise, exemplified by the doomed bargain of 1850, of which the fugitive slave law was the crumbling keystone, was at best a foolish child, at worst the devil's spawn. What does that quote mean to you?
That quote means to me, Eric, and first of all, it's great to be with you. Just how, in a sense, our Civil War was set up. That quote's from a book called The War Before the War by Andrew Del Banco. Actually, I studied with Andrew's brother Nick at the University of Michigan eons ago. But it in a sense rolls out, in a sense, how the North couldn't ignore slavery and ignore the situation anymore because, the history experts that are listening in know ramifications of the fugitive slave law. And the fugitive slave law was, even if freedom seekers got above, well above, say the Mason-Dixon line, authorities, if they apprehended them, could return them back to the South, back to their plantations. And I kind of tripped over this initially when I was researching part of, I think a huge part of Rebel Falls, which deals with the Cataract House Hotel, which was the last, literally one of the last jumping off points in the Underground Railroad, and it was in Niagara Falls, New York. And it was an amazing place because it was pretty much the whole wait staff was African American, some freedmen, some freedom seekers or escaped slaves themselves. And it's just the audacity sometimes, I think, of people in power is mind-blowing, because the Cataract House was one of the most luxurious hotels in the country, if not the world. Charles Dickens stayed there, Abraham Lincoln, even later on, Winston Churchill. But in the years before the Civil War, the plantation owners, the rich folk from the South would come to visit. You had to come see the Cataract House. It was right there by Niagara Falls, one of the wonders of the world. And they often would bring a servant / slave with them too. You know, just going, this is crazy. And so what the Cataract House staff did, especially their wait staff in this very luxurious dining room that existed, they would see who was coming into town. And they would say, oh, okay, they've got so-and-so helping with the children. They've got so-and-so driving the buggy. And they would watch things. And in the course of the stay, come over and approach, in a sense, the enslaved person and say, do you want to get away? You can see Canada from here. That's freedom. Do you want to leave right now? And they had to decide right then. It wasn't, I think about it. It had to be a yes-no decision. And they had this series of steps down literally in the mist and the shadow of the American side of the falls, 290 steps in total that went down to a rowboat with an experienced, skilled oarsman that was ready almost 24/7, ready to row them across that raging current to freedom. So that quote, I'm glad you cited that, because that was up on my bulletin board for a long time. And how when push comes to shove, and we tend to think compromise is admirable, and I do, but there's certain points where compromise doesn't suffice anymore. It's yes, no. You want to move ahead with a better world.
Yeah, I definitely understand that. Especially being in politics, you know, it was Governor Walz just said on the campaign trail. He said it's one thing to compromise on issues, but you never compromise your values. And when it comes to freedom, that's a yes no question. That's not that's not something. Well, I'll come over to Canada and then I'll just get back before my master realizes I'm missing. No, it's either you're in or you're out. And I'm glad you brought it up. We're gonna talk about one of the questions I was gonna talk about was that. But before we get into that, in Niagara Falls, and I keep thinking about that Three Stooges skit. I don't know if you ever saw that or not about Niagara Falls. But I want to talk to you about where you live in Charlottesville, Virginia. Had you moved, and the reason why I'm bringing that up is because this is literally like the anniversary of
yeah, we just had it, the 7th year anniversary.
Yeah, so it's and that was a very interesting time because I was working with the ACLU in Mississippi at that time, and that it was not a bright moment for the ACLU, but I'll get into that in a second. When did you move to Charlotte? So you were there when all that stuff took place?
Yes, we had literally just moved here, Eric, from the DC suburbs from Northern Virginia. And we came here because, we're looking for, a cheaper place. We're looking, we sold our house. The kids were launched. It was time to do something else, time to move on. And we were always looking for a college town. Like I said, I did some studies at Michigan, so Ann Arbor was up there, etc. But Charlottesville is still close to DC, still close to our friends, so we moved here. And I guess what struck me even before the Unite the Right rally or riot was how much, you can see this in certain places. History was much more closer to the surface here. And just in the way people would carry on. It's an insular community, even though we've made great friends in the time we've been here. And frankly, I was shocked when Unite the Right happened. But on the other hand, once I kind of saw the undercurrent, maybe I shouldn't have been that surprised, because that's maybe what we're all, any town is in a sense trying to battle with. And as a writer, and I guess an historian too, it's up to us as people to decide history. And I think sometimes we think, well, history is just, it's cut and dried, it's on stone tablets, it's in the books. But I think it's up to each generation to decide what's going to be the narrative moving forward. And if anything, Charlottesville was fighting, for that narrative moving ahead. And I think we've made great strides, but I know your great work in politics and such, and certainly we're in a political year. We're deciding the narrative again. Things aren't cut and dried. It's really how much do you want to be involved? How much do you know about what's going on and how you're going to act? This would have been, it's funny, because the other place that's kind of central to Rebel Falls is Niagara Falls. And I grew up 15 miles from Niagara Falls. It was a place I loved to visit. And I'd never heard of Confederate spies along the border and such, even though I'm somewhat of a Civil War buff. And Rebel Falls would have been a much different book if I wasn't living in Charlottesville at the time, because many of the things that were being dealt with or grappled with, the struggle during the Civil War, I could see in my community. They were much more personal, and it made certain aspects of the story much more alive than, again, just, hey, there used to be Confederate spies along the border and they almost did this and they tried to do that. And instead it was like, not so much history repeating itself again in a way, but I'm really the mind that times history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. The refrains, the chorus speaks. And that's the way I felt living in Charlottesville and writing this book.
Yeah. So had y'all unpacked y'all boxes yet when all that stuff started, or were y'all that kind of got settled in as like, wait a minute, what's going on? What's happening?
What are we here for? No, we were unpacked, but we moved around town quite a bit. We rented 3 different places because we wanted to kind of make sure this was it for a while. And so I felt like, we were on both sides of the fence a little bit. We were certainly newcomers. People certainly, singled that out with us. We were told several times, "Oh, you're new to town." Yeah, okay, I'm new to town. Just listen to the way I talk. And but on the other hand, felt that's a very beautiful, even though at times star-crossed community, and we felt like really putting down roots, and we did.
So how is Charlottesville now? Because a lot of every American city has history, and every American city has defining events. Charlottesville has been a part of American history for a long time, but most people now relate it to what happened in that rally/riot. How is the city evolved? Are they still grappling with that simmering history that you say is rising to the top? And are they dealing with it a lot better than before? And before you answer that, let me clarify my ACLU comment. So we were the organization, the chapter in Virginia, was the one who fought for these folks to have that march. And needless to say, we had like a national conference call after that. And a lot of us were kind of questioning, are we doing the right thing and pushing for certain people to have a voice, right? In the end, our mission is still, the ACLU mission was still the mission. But we were not happy. And the poor young lady who, she got on the call and she was explaining why they did what he did and all that. But it took a while for the ACLU internally to heal. And this is right when the ACLU was making its money. So I'm, as because of the Trump administration, all that stuff. So if it took an organization that's been around for all these years to heal, I'm just trying to imagine a community that dealt with it at ground zero. How did Charlottesville get to a point now, and where are they now exactly?
I think at times race still divides this community, but I think we're in a much better place than we were 7 years ago. In fact, I just had friends in town, who I've known since college, and they were here well before we moved here, and we're trying to figure out what to do with them. And you always got to go to Monticello. You got to go see where Jefferson was, where Jefferson, had his place. And they had gone to Monticello, I want to say several decades ago, so they knew of it. But they went back, and it's changed so much, especially when you're talking about enslaved people. Sally Hemings has certainly mentioned a great deal now at Monticello. I've got separate exhibits and even tours about that part of its past and where it intersected with Jefferson and such. They were dumbfounded, Eric. They were just like going, how did, and I think they felt they were in a better place with it. They were kind of maybe expecting, wave the flag and the whitewash tour that they got 20 some years ago. Well, you're not getting that anymore at Monticello. And I think that's a real step in the right direction. And I know several people who are tour guides there, and let's just say they don't pull any punches. I mean, you're getting the history. And again, there's the battle for the narrative. And so I think from a narrative standpoint and telling really the truth about things, I think Charlottesville's in a much better place than it was before Unite the Right. Now, that doesn't mean it didn't hurt, and didn't mean that, a lot of people were either incensed or scared or whatever. I mean, it was like the bullies had come to town. But I think in a lot of ways, if the bullies ever come back here, we're much more prone or much more prepared to fight. And I think that's a healthy thing.
Yeah, and just to elaborate on that point, so just like people were saying, they could tell you weren't from here. A lot of those folks that organized that rally, they weren't from Charlottesville either, I take it.
No. And yet, in a sense, I don't know, the barn door, the door, whatever, was left so wide open. Again, when we have friends come to visit, when I lived in DC, I used to give a night tour of the, Vietnam Memorial and Dr. King statue and Lincoln and etc. I'm finding now that people come to visit, I'm still prone to give tours, but I always show where the Unite the Right folks came with their tiki torches right up through the lawn, right past the rotunda on the university, kind of beat up with some students and were rallying around the Jefferson statue. And again, people I think are agog, but I think once people know the actual setting and know the place and here's what happens, I think they're much more clued in and much more, I guess, willing to do the right thing, or much more prepared to do the right thing.
Yeah, and you're talking about Jefferson. I think, America, most of the great leaders in America deal with dichotomy, right? Um, Jefferson is a classic example. Here's the guy who wrote these eloquent words that many of us have used to justify our existence in the nation, and yet he was one of the people perpetrating the what we call the peculiar institution, one of the most cruel treatments of human beings in the history of the world. Um, so even though it seemed like you said, people were shocked, it was almost in a weird kind of way fitting that that kind of conflict would happen in Charlottesville because the guy who is probably its most famous citizen or made his most famous contribution to the city had to deal with that dichotomy personally himself.
Yes. I mean, I think you would agree, Eric, he's one of the ultimate contradictions when you come to action, words, whatever. And I was also reminded living here, just the power of what we enshrine in terms of statues or what we put out there. I mean, the Lee and Jackson statues are gone now, hallelujah. But they weren't gone. That's one of the reasons why things took off. And there's a scene in Rebel Falls, I must admit, where I have the rebel spies in Niagara Falls, New York, and they're kind of talking about, boy, if our schemes work, we'll have a Confederate States of America, even though it's 1864, they're losing the war, we can still pull the war out of the fire, so to speak. We can still win. And one of them immediately says, yeah, we could build a statue. We could build a statue to Lee. And that's really coming from living here and walking by those statues for the first couple of years and then being just absolutely thrilled, that they aren't there anymore, that they were taken away one morning while my wife is walking to the farmer's market. She called me up and said, Tim, they're taking down the statues. That was a day of celebration.
Yeah. So Charlottesville kind of gave you the inspiration to write this book, the events that took place, and but you went back to your old stomping grounds, and you found this story about the Confederates' plan to seize the USS Michigan on Lake Erie and bombard Buffalo, Cleveland, and other northern cities. How did you find out that there was this Civil War battle or potential Civil War battle in Niagara Falls?
Well, Eric, I tripped over it. I was reading Doris Kearns Goodwin's Team of Rivals and also Carl Sandburg's Lincoln a little bit after that. And I don't like footnotes. I like endnotes. And these two cats are mentioned in the endnotes and such for both of those books. And one's a guy named John Yates Bell, who actually went to University of Virginia, law student. Another guy named Bennett Burley, who came from Scotland and kind of a soldier of fortune. And they were kind of the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, or the Odd Couple, or maybe the Three Stooges missing a stooge or something from this point in 1864. And what people need to remember, and I didn't know this, I grew up right near the border. I married a Canadian. I knew none of this, was that in 1864, the South was becoming so desperate to carry the day in some way, play off the Norse war fatigue. The war's been going on for so long, massive casualties, that they had a spy network pretty much going from Halifax, Nova Scotia to Detroit, Michigan. And it had, hundreds of spies. They were well financed. The Richmond leadership, Confederate leadership had to decide, okay, we're running out of men, money, whatever, but let's send a fair amount of money to the northern border. And they were looking to do things like seize the Michigan, which was an amazing vessel, steamer, sail, iron hull. It had great weapons. And the other thing that made it a very intriguing weapon to seize, at least from the rebels or the Confederates' point of view, is there was nothing else like it on the Great Lakes at that point. Everything else was part of the blockade along the eastern seaboard. Ships were being built for that. This was like it. So if they had seized it, there wasn't much to stop them, at least initially. And their timing for this scheme was impeccable. They were looking to seize it on the eve of Abraham Lincoln's bid for re-election. Now, some people go, well, that's not that big a deal. You look at the Electoral College and he wipes out George McClellan like 212 to 21 or something like that in terms of Electoral College votes. But in the buildup to the election, even Lincoln wasn't sure if he was going to win. The war had been going on 4 years. Again, a lot of casualties. You had a lot of people in the North just saying, we're done. We're out of here. Just let the Confederates do what they want to do. We'll sit tight here. And so, again, if they'd been able to bombard Cleveland, Buffalo, Toledo, which was Erie, parts of their plan, it could have had serious ramifications for Lincoln's reelection bid. And people forget one of the things McClellan, even though he was a former Union general, by this point in time in his political career, he was really cozying up to the Copperheads, and the Copperheads were the ones saying, let's make peace with the South. This has gone on far enough. So our world could have been potentially a lot different if the Confederate spies had gained a little bit more traction.
Yeah, Burley's an interesting character, and I guess from what I know about Scottish people, he fits right in because it's one scene where he's like he gets stabbed because he starts talking about the war, and it was like he said everybody was having a good time, and then he started talking about the war. Next thing you know, he's getting stabbed and beat up in an alley, right?
Yeah.
And so. He's taken care of by the protagonist in the story, this lady named Rory Chase. Where did you?
Yes.
Huh? Oh, I'm sorry. Where did you conjure her up from? Why did you feel that
Yes.
you had to tell it from a female perspective like that?
Well, Eric, Rory is maybe the only major character in Rebel Falls that's made up, and she's even a composite of some really interesting women. I did it, number one, because I don't feel women get their due. They only get their due half the time anyway, but certainly in the Civil War, I mean, they were doing some amazing things on both sides. I mean, you had a woman, Sarah Edmonds, who joined the infantry out of Michigan, fought in her regiment for 3 years, left pretty much deserted because she was suffering from PTSD. And then 20 years later, in a sense, outed herself in court to get her military pension. I mean, you had a lot of women like this on both sides. So I kind of put together Rory because I wanted to somewhat honor the women that I think have been lost in the shadows to history. Again, we're kind of taught the Civil War in kind of a conventional way. It tends to focus mostly on battles and generals. Okay, it's Lee and Grant and Lincoln, etc. So I wanted to make it a little bit different way. But also the other thing I wanted to do was bring in the Seward family into this whole struggle. William Seward was Secretary of State at this point in time, arguably the second most powerful person in the North after Lincoln. Very interesting family. And he's the one who goes on and buys Alaska, for example, soon after the war. But in the buildup, as the Confederates are taking charge along our northern border, he's the one, along with Secretary of War Stanton, who have to scramble and somehow get their own spies involved. And he turns to Rory Chase and other individuals to do that. Now, the other reason I wanted to bring in Seward, or found a good way to do it, was that I decided, let's make Rory Chase a childhood friend of Fanny Seward, the only daughter of Secretary Seward. This allows now me to take the reader to the big posh parties in Washington. This allows us to kind of get a back way in, and there's two scenes in Rebel Falls I'm really proud of that involve Lincoln, and Fanny is the way through to that. You have to remember that the Sewards lived in Lafayette Square, right across the street almost from the White House. And they did that because Seward wanted to be close to Lincoln. And one of the stories I love about that friendship between Abraham Lincoln and William Seward is when Richmond finally falls. Lincoln is there like the next day. He takes a boat down, tours around Richmond, and he comes back, that night. And the first person he's got to tell about this is his good friend, William Seward. And Seward's recovering from a carriage accident. He's in bad shape. He's on the top floor of the third floor of his townhouse there on Lafayette Square. Lincoln goes up and tells him, "We've done it. Richmond's fallen. This war is going to end." And he starts to tell him this, and then he even lies down in the bed next to Seward. He's got to get sideways because Lincoln's so tall, and just relates the whole day to him. That's how close they were. And so kind of Rory Chase, composite of several prominent women, but she's the ticket into the Sewards and the ticket even to Lincoln.
Now, prior to writing this, were you kind of a big Civil War buff? Were you, like Ken Burns and what's the guy? Oh God, now I can't think of his name. But when I was in Mississippi, we used to hear this guy all the time, Shelby Foote.
Yeah.
I was
just reading some Shelby Foote the other day.
Yeah. So are you at their level, or are you just kind of dabbling in it?
I don't know if I'm at their level. I like to think I'm not quite dabbling, but I grew up a Civil War buff. My grandfather really liked history. He took me to Gettysburg for the first time. I still remember that. I was about 9 or 10 years old. But it's getting a little bit deeper with that. I can still remember the first trip to Gettysburg, and I bought, or my grandfather bought for me, like a Union blue hat. And we're at the store, and they're selling both blue hats and gray hats. And the woman selling it, the cashier, going, "Oh, that's the first one of those we sold today." I'm going, she's selling a lot more Rebel caps. And I'm going, "What's this about?" And so, I think it's a great kind of segue into our nation's soul in some way, for good and for evil, that just plays out, and people are so passionate about this, and somehow the fear level is so high. So I don't want to say I'm with Shelby Foote, and certainly Ken. I've known Ken Burns for a while, and I don't want to put myself in that category. But again, it's the power of the story, or the power of the narrative. And I was just, like I say, reading some Shelby Foote the other day. My wife works in a secondhand bookstore, and they just got the whole 3-book series that Foote did of the Civil War. And I was waiting for her to get off work, and I'm just sitting there on the couch and flipping through it. And in one of his early scenes, he's got Grant has come to Washington to take over all the Union command. Lincoln's decided he's my man. He's got to take it over. And he goes to Matthew Brady's studio on 7th Street in Pennsylvania. I know the address. And to get his photo done. And in doing so, one of Brady's assistants kind of breaks the skylight, and glass rains down on Grant. And thank God, he didn't get really badly cut up or even killed. And Brady says, "I think we got the right guy for the job, because that glass is raining down on him. He doesn't flinch. He's just still looking at the camera like, click the shutter, you dope. I'm ready to go." And I never heard that story. So that's the thing. I love story. And I think in some ways, the Civil War is so complicated between things like women, northern border with Canada, place like the Cataract House Hotel, that it keeps you going.
Yeah. And so at the beginning of the interview, you were talking about how the slaves were, the slaves or the servants that were working at the hotel were recruiting slaves to participate in the Underground Railroad. Why did you feel that needed to be part of the story as well?
Because I think in some ways, we compartmentalize things so much that it's easy to go, "Oh, okay, Underground Railroad's done because the war started, and then, okay, the war ends and but no, things blur and bleed into other categories. And the Cataract House was still there. And you still had that crack wait staff that used to help freedom seekers get literally across the last river to cross, which was the Niagara River, into Canada. And they were brought into this. Again, Seward, Stanton are looking for any help. And so it's like, oh, we've got these amazing folks that worked at the Underground Railroad, at the Cataract House. Let's use them. Let's bring them in. And they did. And what people need to remember is that, Harriet Tubman, for example, was big Cataract House. I mean, there's at least 70, 80 escapes that she kind of led, even though, she was from a different part of the state. And I'd urge anybody who's in Niagara Falls, going to visit, don't get caught up in all the touristy stuff and the ticky-tack. I mean, do some of it. I mean, do Maid of the Mist or Cave of the Winds. I mean, I do all that too. But make time to go to the Underground Railroad Heritage Center. It's a small museum, but it just opened my eyes on how resourceful and how just the plots and the schemes to help freedom seekers were just amazing. And just the courage people showed time and time again. There's literally listed hundreds of escapes across the borders and across the border. And again, they're going by steamer, they're going by rowboat, but again, the thing that always struck me, Eric, was, maybe this is the thing you've been dreaming about. Maybe, I can get to freedom, but here comes somebody like leaning into you in the shadows of the Cataract House Hotel and just said, yeah, you can go, but it's now. It's not tell me tomorrow or something. It's right now. You need to decide. And that, in a sense, I think shows maybe the most amount of courage in a way, as so many people, here's maybe ultimately what they've been dreaming about, whatever, there it is. And they had the courage to take the plunge.
Yeah. And I next time I get a chance to go to Niagara Falls, I'll definitely go to that museum because I've been there a couple of times and, just trying to picture those folks in a rowboat. I went to that museum where they've got like all the barrels and kayaks
Yeah.
that failed to navigate the falls and all that stuff, or it literally went down them. And so, and it's at a part of the river where you can see how strong that current is. And just imagining people in the 1860s trying to row a boat to navigate that, that was a very, very, because I had been there, that was a very, very important visual for me. So I'm glad that you
Yeah.
incorporated that in the book.
And the good oarsman could do it in 8 to 9 minutes. So next time
Crazy.
you're there, look at that current and the way it's ripping, and you go, whoa, they literally got across the other side in 8 to 9 minutes.
That's incredible. All right, so if people want to get this book or they want to get in touch with you, Tim, how does that work?
The website is just timwendel.com. Some of the stuff I've said today, people are going, what's he talking about? There was rebel spies in Canada. Reach out to me. I'll tell you even more about it. Actually, and so website, books everywhere, and just one real quick story. You can tell I love stories. Is I just found this out that I got to find a way to work this in somewhere. But when John Wilkes Booth is apprehended and shot by mistake, they were supposed to take him alive. 12 days after assassinating Lincoln, they empty his pockets. They find coins, they find a pocket knife, they find a diary that was kind of interesting. He thought he was going to be greeted as this conquering hero in the South. And he was caught in Port Royal, Virginia, I'm sorry. And 12 days after the assassination. But the thing that blew their mind was one of the things they found in there was a banknote for 60 pounds, which was a significant amount of money back then. And it had been issued from a major bank in Montreal. He was in Canada a lot, and it appears a lot of the assassination attempts, certainly the attempt first to kidnap Lincoln, was funded through funds coming through Canada, Confederate funds and coming through there. So again, I grew up near the Canadian border, and I still find this amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing when you find out stuff. And I'm a big student of history. I love history too. So, ladies and gentlemen, go out and get the book Rebel Falls. Tim Wendel, it's been an honor to talk to you. Any other time that you've got something, I think you're going to convert me to reading more fiction. And
it's not that tough a leap, Eric. It's all right.
And anytime you want to come back on, man, I greatly appreciate it. And thank you for coming on the podcast. I was really honored to have you on.
Oh, thank you so much. I was honored as well. Thank you for your time.
All right, guys. And we're going to catch y'all on the other side. All right, and we are back. And so now I have my next guest, and that person is Michael Taylor. You can call him Coach Michael Taylor. Michael Taylor is a shining example of resilience and determination, having overcome immense personal challenges to become a renowned life coach, motivational speaker, and best-selling author. His unwavering commitment to empowering others has inspired countless individuals to pursue their dreams and live extraordinary lives. A former high school dropout, Michael faced seemingly insurmountable odds, including divorce, bankruptcy, foreclosure, depression, and even homelessness. Yet through sheer grit and an unshakable belief in himself, he emerged from these trials as a beacon of hope and inspiration. With 14 published books under his belt, Michael's words have touched the lives of readers worldwide, guiding them toward personal growth, self-discovery, and the realization of their full potential. As a certified life coach, he has dedicated his life to helping men and women break free from self-imposed limitations and embrace the extraordinary within themselves. Michael's journey has been a testament to the power of perseverance and the indomitable human spirit. As the president and CEO of Creation Publishing Group, he continues to champion the pursuit of dreams and the creation of a life filled with purpose and fulfillment. Happily married to his soulmate, Badra, for over 2 decades, Michael finds solace and joy in the simple pleasures of life. When he's not empowering others through his writing and coaching, you'll find him indulging in the soulful melodies of 70s and 80s music or immersing himself in the latest cinematic masterpieces. With an infectious optimism and an unwavering passion for the impossible, Michael Taylor stands as a testament to the boundless potential that lies within each of us. He firmly believes that there has never been a better time to be alive on this planet, and his mission is to inspire others to embrace this belief and live their lives to the fullest. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and privilege to have as a guest on this podcast, Coach Michael Taylor. All right, Coach Michael Taylor. How you doing, sir? You doing good?
Man, I am killing it, Eric. Glad to be here with you today.
Well, I wouldn't expect you to say anything less. You are a ray of sunshine in this world that we live in right now. So I definitely wanted to get you on this political podcast to kind of lighten the load a little bit. We're going to talk about some stuff, but your approach and your story is really, really impressive. So I think the listeners are going to really benefit from you. So what I like to do in the beginning is throw a quote at the guest, kind of an icebreaker. So this is your quote. We are greater than our past. Greater than our feelings and suggested thoughts. Greater than our feelings. What does that quote mean to you?
Well, for me, I have a mentor named Wayne Dyer. You ever hear of Dr. Wayne Dyer?
That name sounds familiar.
Yeah, he was really popular back in the 80s. Oprah said he was her favorite guest, but he wrote a book way back in the day called Your Erroneous Zones. And in the book, he says that we are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. And I really align with that idea that as human beings, we're actually spiritual beings. So there's an essence, a part of us that is divine. And when we learn to connect to that part of ourselves, then we understand that we are in complete control of what we think, how we feel, and how we act. And so everything I do stems from that belief that I'm a spiritual being having a human experience versus a human being having a spiritual experience.
Yeah, that reminds me of the old Billy Graham quote. He said, I'm not from here. I'm just traveling through until I get back home. You describe yourself as an irrepressible optimist with a passion for the impossible. When did you discover that about yourself?
Well, if I can go back a little bit, at the age of 23, I was living the American dream with the house, the wife, the 2.5 kids, and all of that. And at the age of 29, that dream turned into a nightmare as I went through a divorce, bankruptcy, foreclosure, a deep, deep state of depression. And I was homeless for 2 years living out of my car. And during that time, I asked myself a simple question. What does it mean to be a man? Because I'd done everything I thought a man was supposed to do to be happy, and I was absolutely miserable. And so as a result of asking myself that question, I went what I'll call my journey of transformation. And it was on this journey that I discovered lots of interesting things about myself that I didn't know. And so after putting my life back together, overcoming all those adversities, I realized that, I wanted to share the lessons that I learned over that difficult period with other men. And so I started writing back in 1995. And I really attribute most of my resilience to my mom. Because my mom was a single mom back in the 60s. We were basically the poster children for poverty. But she never once said that, she never promoted the idea that we were victims. My mom always said, if you want something badly enough, no one can stop you from attaining it except yourself. And it was that lesson, I think, that allowed me to create this mindset that I could do anything I set my mind to. And I think that's where it all comes from.
Yeah. And that's really, really powerful because, a lot of us go through that. I've dealt with depression myself. I guess I'm a little more of an adventurer than you. I've been married 3 times and been divorced 3 times. So I haven't found my niche in that, but I'm an old baseball player. So 3 strikes, you're out on that tip. But seriously though, I think that we as black men don't really know how to deal with that. And I know that your whole mission has been to try to get black men to understand the power that they have. In regards to that, let me ask this question. Are black men really thriving in American society?
In my perception, absolutely. And if I can share this story real quickly, this is how and why I became a writer. Back during that time when I was telling you about all the challenges I was going through, I was in a restaurant and I overheard a conversation between these 2 apparently well-educated, well-spoken professional black men. And they were having a conversation about the eradication of black men from society. And I got to tell you, it was one of the most depressing conversations I'd ever heard. So I walked over to their table. I apologized for eavesdropping. And I looked at one of the guys and I said, please tell me you don't believe what you just said. And the guy looks up at me and he says, don't you watch the news? I believe in 20 years, all black men will either be dead or in jail. And when he said it, it literally broke my heart. And I knew there was nothing I could have said that would have changed his mind. So I put my hand on his shoulder And I said, don't believe the hype, my brother. Don't believe the hype. And I walked away. And as I walked away, there was a part of me that said, Michael, you have to do something. Now, at the time, my life was in total chaos. And who was I to believe that I could do something? But I can't explain it, but there was just this intuitive knowing that I was supposed to do something to empower Black men. Well, after rebuilding my life, again, I started with going to therapy and doing workshops and stuff. And I said, I got it. I know what I'm supposed to do. And I wrote a book back in 1995 called Brothers, Are You Listening? A Success Guide for the 90s. And it was my attempt to engage Black men in a conversation about personal growth and development. And amazingly, when I first wrote that book, I got a lot of pushback from Black men because I was talking about things like expressing your emotions and being optimistic. And so it's amazing to me that a lot of Black men have this idea that it's not possible for us to succeed. Now, obviously, there are lots of challenges out there. Don't deny the challenges. But at the same time, how is it possible for a young Black man with only an 11th grade education, who'd gone through divorce, bankruptcy, foreclosure, depression, and homelessness, to be able to pick himself back up, become an author of 15 books, be featured on national television, simply because of a commitment that he made that he was going to create an extraordinary life? So in answer to your question, I believe Black men are actually thriving, and you simply don't see it in mainstream media. And so what I tried to do was create a movement that showcased and highlight Black men in a positive light. And so I started the Shatter the Stereotypes movement because I think that's the key to our success. We have to be willing to examine some of the negative media stereotypes and be willing to change our inner narratives about ourselves, because ultimately, I believe, as mentioned, there's never been a better time to be alive on the planet than right now. And again, people will say, oh man, you don't understand what's going on. And so that's my perception. And what I help men do is to change their perception, because we all remember what the good book said. Be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And that's what my work is about. It's about changing the mindset of Black men.
So you mentioned about mainstream media, so I'm going to try to get two questions in one. One, why is the future of race relations brighter than one may think? And then how does mainstream media contribute to the division that is out there?
Well, we got to understand what drives the media. Negativity. That's what drives our media. And when it comes to Black folk, we know that primarily the mainstream media focuses on the negative aspects of who we are. We see all those negative stereotypes perpetuated throughout the media. Now, once again, I'm a science guy. I love science. I like to understand things. And so my belief is there's a woman by the name of Barbara Marx Hubbard who wrote an amazing book called Conscious Evolution. And in her book, she theorizes that human beings are still evolving. And I completely agree with that. So I believe human beings are still evolving. And if you apply science to my way of thinking, you'll understand what I'm saying. So I was born in the 60s. I understand the struggle. I was, raised in all of that. And when I look at America, in my short 63-year lifespan, I've seen us go from the 60s with all the racial segregation, the police brutality, the dogs, the water hoses, and all that. When I see that in my short lifetime, we've gone from that to, number one, having a Black male president, number two, having a Black possible female president, to me, that's progress. So if you look at the trajectory that we're on, to me, I say we're moving in the right direction. Now, are we want to be where we want to be? Of course not. There's a long way to go. But at the same time, there are more of us who are promoting this idea that we have the capacity to create truly extraordinary lives. And so my work is to empower Black men to recognize, don't pay attention to mainstream media, because we know what it's going to showcase. We have to stop looking outside of ourselves, look within our own hearts and minds, and that's how we can change our lives.
Yeah, because, and I deal with politics having been an elected official, being a student of it, the rhetoric that's out there. And I look at certain campaigns. Well, I look at one particular party as representing the party of the last stand, right? That they are trying to hold on to a concept that white is right and everything else is wrong. And I think it's a powerful message to convey to black people, especially black men, that they have to look within, that they have to understand their importance, their godliness, or however you want to phrase it, their spirituality. Because, the Bible teaches us too that, the spirit that dwells within us is not a spirit of fear. And so, I used to try to convey that in a lot of my political speeches. But this kind of leads me to this next question. So in 2020, we kind of had people are saying that it was a reckoning when it came to race. Watching George Floyd be murdered on live internet, television, however you want to look at it, kind of brought us to a sense of, hey, something needs to be done, right? And so out of that came all of these DEI programs. And now it seems as though 4 years later that all these companies and everybody is trying to get rid of these DEI programs, like, okay, we've achieved whatever goal we were trying to achieve. Why are DEI programs important to make America the indispensable nation, as Joe Biden likes to say? Why is it important for America to be the best it can be through these programs? Why should these corporations not abandon what they've started?
Well, what's amazing to me is the fact that in the next 10 years or so, white people are actually going to be the minority. And so these people that are fighting the DEI, guess what? If you're running a company, you're not going to have a choice because your employees may not look like you. So you need to find the best talent regardless of race. Again, I recognize, and it still amazes me that in 2024, we've got people that are banning books and fighting against these programs. But I like to look at it from what Barbara Marx Herbert was saying when she was talking about evolution. Because we can't stop human evolution. We can't stop the fact that human beings are still evolving. And so when we look at collectively, although the media is going to show you all the stories about the people that are fighting DEI, there's a lot more people that are actually promoting DEI because you don't have a choice. As a corporation, you need people, regardless of ethnicity. Now, you're still going to have the pushbacks. You're still going to have the racist, mindsets. But overwhelmingly, and I think about the George Floyd situation, because I think it was a really critical turning point for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think a lot of white people said, okay, I need to rethink this whole idea about police brutality because they saw the brutality of how he was killed. But even more importantly, what I saw after that was black men coming together to try to find solutions to the challenges that we have. For example, what you don't see in mainstream media are programs like the Black Man Can't Institute by Brandon Frame. What you don't see in mainstream media is black executive men by a brother named Jewel Love, who works with some of the most highly educated, wealthiest black men in the country. What you don't see is shatter the stereotypes, right? You don't see these movements, but what happened is when the George Floyd thing happened, I saw a community coming together that you don't see in mainstream media. And so black men, from what I'm experiencing, are looking for ways to come together to empower ourselves. We can no longer wait for the media or them to change our lives, we have to do it ourselves. And so that George Floyd incident empowered us in ways that you just don't see in mainstream media.
Yeah. And, that kind of brings up a point about why I do what I do with the podcast, because, it could be I could very easily just always have elected officials and campaign strategists and all that stuff on this type of show. But the main thing I want to highlight is the fact that there are people who are not elected doing the work that needs to be done. And you are one of those examples. Going out, like you said, you're not going to be on mainstream media every day. And I don't think you would want to be on mainstream media every day, to be honest. But, the work that you're doing in the community to uplift men, especially black men, is vitally important, because it makes it easier for somebody that's elected to be able to articulate what is really needed, right? See, they always make the argument about, we got to answer the census, which I don't have any problem with, but the argument we say is make sure that you fill out the census so that we can control where the dollars go, right? But the census doesn't talk about depression. The census doesn't delve into why there's a wealth gap, right? And so when you have people out in the community like you that are instilling pride and self-awareness, you have people that are like doing research about what's going on in communities and why certain activities like violence or poverty exist, that needs to be highlighted so that people, when they make political decisions, they're better informed. So, again, I'm really glad that you're doing what you're doing, and I appreciate the answer to the question, because, it's the bottom line is, if you want to make money in the United States of America in the 21st century, you have to be diverse. That's just the bottom line. If you believe that this is a capitalist society, you gotta be diverse. It can't be the good old boys club anymore. I think it's really, really important to stress that. Now, I want to go ahead.
Here, let me throw this out here. And I can give you 2 words of why I'm so optimistic about the future. Okay? 2 words, simple. Information and technology. As black folk, we now have access to information and technology that we can pretty much do anything we set our mind to. I am blown away by the fact that even you and I having this conversation today, right? I'm sitting at home in my home office. You've got this program that you're able to put together content and put it out and show it around the globe. I do my podcast from my home office, right? I reach men around the globe with my Shatter the Stereotypes movement. So I'm getting black men around the world to engage in this new conversation. And it cost me $15 a month to do that. So the technology is there. Can you imagine how many slaves Harriet Tubman could have helped free if she had the technology that we have today? I mean, it's mind-boggling. So the fact that we have access to information and technology is what drives my optimism, because it is now up to us to create content so that we can grow, so that we can be transformed. And it's limitless what we can do now.
Yeah, you used the Harriet Tubman example. I used the Haiti example. Just imagine if we had the internet and black folks enslaved in the South saw on the internet these black folks in Haiti said, you know what, we ain't got to be slaves no more.
Exactly.
Thomas Jefferson was scared just of word of mouth. Just imagine, right? So getting into that, I want to get into some of the spiritual things real quick before we go. You make the argument that spirituality is love-based and most religions are fear-based. Kind of expound on that statement.
So, as a former atheist, there was a time in my life where I was absolutely convinced there was no such thing as God. And one of the reasons I felt that way is because I didn't have anyone explain to me some very simple concepts about God. For example, my grandparents were very, very religious people, and they made me go to church even though they didn't go. And my grandmother was a raging alcoholic who beat me, and I mean, she was just an awful person. So from an early age, I saw, because my grandmother had the statue of Jesus on the wall and the Jesus all over the place. And yet they're trying to get me to accept this person, this Jesus character. But they, to me, were the representatives. And the way they treated me didn't reflect love, right? So at an early age, I just didn't buy into that. Well, again, it wasn't until I went through my divorce that I started asking myself some deeper questions about God. And so I just went on the journey. I said, you know what? I'm going to find my truth about God. So once again, I love science. And so I actually got involved with what's called the New Age movement. And the New Age movement allowed me to combine spirituality with science, because some people think there's a conflict there. I don't. Science and spirituality are two sides of the same coin. I don't think you can have one without the other. But what I noticed, that I was brought up Baptist, and I remember I felt a lot of guilt, a lot of shame, a lot of fear about God most of my life, because I kind of saw God as this old white dude up in the clouds taking notes of my life, waiting for me to screw up so he could send me to hell. Well, in my belief system now, if you were to ask me what's my definition of God, my definition of God is the divine intelligence that created and is still creating this amazing universe that we live in. This divine intelligence is literally love. Love is the animating force of life. And a religion's job is to teach you how to access that love. And when we learn to access that love, nothing is impossible for us. So again, I don't buy into this whole fear-based, if you do this, God's going to punish you and all that. I believe that there is an energy in me. There is a divine essence of me, which is God, that is expressing through me as me. Therefore, everything I do is based on the idea that that something is love.
Yeah, and I ascribe to that too. I think that, I guess I'm not considered a new age person, but in a sense I am, because, I understand the relationship between science and spirituality, in that when we find out things, to me, it's more of a testament that there is a creator, a higher power, because no man could make a tree, right? We've tried, but there's no man can make a tree. You can kind of mess around with grass. You can kind of mix the grass up, but you can't create that seed, right? And so, the more that we find out about this universe, and then there's always the argument, and we deal with this in politics a lot here in America. Well, it's creation and it was God, and, it wasn't this evolution and all that stuff. And I asked the guy one day, I said, if you created the universe, what would be a day to you? And he kind of just looked at me like, what are you saying? I'm saying, we created time. Man did that. We based that off of what we observed when the sun shone and then when the moon showed up, right? And then we figured out how long it takes for this piece of rock to travel around the star that we call the sun. So we came up with the concept of time. So it's like, you say 7 days, that could have been 7 million years. You understand what I'm saying? It's like, so you can't take something literal from man's limited understanding and say, this is definitive, this is what it is, right? And so, a lot of this stuff, when we get into the abortion discussion, all these kind of things, that plays a lot into it. And then a lot of people use religion as a political tool or as a control tool, right? Because I remember there were a lot of friends when I went to college, and it was like the first time they ever played cards was when they got away from their house, right? Because the preacher said, no, you can't play cards. No, that's a sin, right? And the reality is that some of them preachers, especially them one Sunday a month preachers, they were kind of concerned that offering wasn't going to be as heavy if everybody was out there playing cards, gambling, whatever. So, that was a control mechanism. That had nothing biblical or spiritual about that. So, that's why I really appreciate when people break down what the real essence of worshiping God is. And if you look at the Torah, if you look at the Bible, if you look at the Quran, they're all instruction manuals, right? Now, the Bible tells more and the Torah tells more of a historical story to kind of get you to a particular point of how these certain characters interacted. But the moral of the story, the reason why those stories were selected was to provide instruction. The Torah is pretty much, not the Torah, the Quran is not as much allegory as it is just straight up, don't do this, you can do that, try to, But the other books kind of tell a story to illustrate why it's important to live that certain lifestyle. So, again, it's all about manipulation.
Yeah. But if I could real quick. So, again, when I went on my journey to find my truth, as mentioned, I went to a Buddhist temple, I went to a Jewish synagogue, I went to a Muslim mosque, and I just started asking people, what do you believe and why? And so as I started asking these questions, I started, reading some of their text to kind of get a deeper understanding of it all. But then I had a revelation for me, and this is how I see it. This is just Michael Taylor's perception. Every religion originates from the same source and leads to the same place. As you mentioned, a religion is simply an instruction manual to help you get to that place, whatever that place is for you. So for me, the way I see it is that, once again, love is the foundation of it all. Love is literally God. God is literally love. And so our job is to create what I'll call an intimacy and connection with the divine, with that love. And when we do that, we become instruments that love flows through. So everything that I'm doing, I'm driven by this love that says, okay, Michael, I need you to do this, because ultimately I believe God's intention for creating this universe is to create heaven right here on earth. This is what I believe. My job is to work hand in hand with God, with love, to make that happen. Now, will that happen in my lifetime? Who knows? But as you mentioned, time doesn't exist anyway. So all I have to do is make that connection to that divine intelligence that I'm talking about and allow it to move through me. And so how does it do that? Through writing books, through speaking, through doing workshops. All of this is the outcome that God is just using me as a tool to get to the ultimate goal, which is heaven on earth.
So let's close out with this question. Why is adversity our greatest ally?
Because every adversity, if you're willing to look deeply enough, brings you a gift and a lesson. As I look at my divorce, at the time, without question, it was the most painful experience of my life. I wouldn't wish that on anybody. It was that painful. But now, in retrospect, I can see my divorce was the best thing that ever happened to me. Because if not for my divorce, I would still be trapped on that societal roller coaster, doing what society said I was supposed to be doing, having a corporate job, having a wife, having the 2.5 kids. But as a result of the divorce and the pain that I went through and the lessons that I learned, I awakened to the essence of who I was put on the planet to be. So I see adversity from my perspective as what I call a cosmic slap upside the head. God said, look, man, you're not doing what I put you on the planet to do. I need to take some drastic measures to get your attention because I need you to go in a different direction. So my divorce was that cosmic slap on the head that said, Michael, you're not supposed to be doing this. This is what you're supposed to be doing. Because if not for my divorce, I would have never become an author. I would have never become a facilitator. I would never become a podcaster. I'd still be trapped. But now I have the freedom to be who I am, to be who God designed me to be. And as difficult and as painful as my life had been, if I had to do my life all over again, I wouldn't change a thing. Because if I did, I wouldn't be the man that I am today. So I am grateful for all of it, the painful stuff as well as the joyful stuff.
So, ladies and gentlemen, this is just a taste of what you can get when you interact with Coach Michael Taylor. And I tried deliberately to pick questions based off of stuff that he talks about on the regular. So, Coach, if people want to get in touch with you and get you to speak or try to get, some of the books or some of the lessons that you have online, how can they do that?
Well, if you go to CoachMichaelTaylor.com, that's my primary speaker site, CoachMichaelTaylor.com. But specifically for the brothers out there who may be watching this, if they go to ShatterTheStereotypes.com, I've created a whole community for Black men to empower, to inspire, to motivate you. There's master classes on there. There's podcasts. There's interviews. I've done interviews with men from around the globe, from astrophysicists to spine surgeons to doctors, lawyers, attorneys, you name it. I've interviewed brothers just so that we can have access to positive male role models. So if they'll log on to ShatterTheStereotypes.com, they'll get a wealth of knowledge and information that will inspire them to create extraordinary lives.
Yeah, and I apologize, Coach. I didn't say at the beginning because I've got a face for radio. This is strictly audio, but people are listening. And so, and for those who are listening, because the Hebrew brothers got the nice T-shirt on and everything else. But seriously, though, I think people are going to really benefit if they plug into you as far as what you're doing. I am glad that you are doing what you're doing, and I'm really, really honored to have you, Coach, on the podcast.
Well, again, Eric, this is another reason for my optimism. The fact that you and I can have this conversation, that we can connect as brothers, sharing information that empowers others. This is what it's going to take to change our communities. This is the kind of work we must be willing to do, especially as Black men. There's this misconception that, we don't work together. Well, I disagree with that. I mean, I've got brothers around the globe that, man, we come together, we collaborate, and that's what it's all about. So again, I just wanted to thank you for giving me an opportunity to be on your podcast.
All right, guys, that was Coach Michael Taylor, and we'll catch y'all on the other side. All right, and we are back. So I want to thank Tim Wendel and Coach Michael Taylor for coming on. Please go to CoachMichaelTaylor.com. Check out all the lessons and books and speeches and all those cool things that Coach Taylor has put forward for the edification of Black men. And then I want you to also get Tim's book, Rebel Falls. And once you get that book, you probably want to get some of the other books that he has written. I'm intrigued about the baseball themed books that he's written, and so I'm probably going to grab a couple of those myself. But again, I appreciate them for coming on, and I hope that you enjoyed listening to them on the podcast. This is a good time, and I know we're challenged on that, but this is a good time for us to be engaged in what's going on in the political world and to highlight people who may not be on your TV screen every day, but are doing the work and the research needed for us that live in a better society. But despite all the challenges, we're going to get through it. And as long as I'm able to do this podcast, you're going to have a voice of reason. You're going to have a voice of encouragement. And you're going to have a voice of activism to make sure that we get through these times. No matter how challenging, they're still great. So I'm taking that lesson from Coach Taylor. All right, guys. Until next time.